Can't decide and torn between a romantic, comedy, action, or an indie film to watch for the weekend? Well. Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast is your ultimate guide to the latest movies. Join us as we dissect the latest on the blockbusters. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast.
Welcome, and thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your gracious host, Melissa Goller, and I am so excited to air my show on the GSMC Network. I love podcasts and I love film. After all, little secret, I write them and I get them made. Combining those two things will be the basis for a show that I want should appeal to cinephiles all the world over. This will be a show where we discuss great films, no matter how big or how small. And most importantly, it's a show where we will never be afraid to get creative. Let's do this. In this episode, I am excited to share with you my thoughts on the 2021 Academy Award nominated short films in part 1 of 2 episodes. I've noticed a theme in this category that maybe influenced the Academy in considering these films, which I'll explain in the end. And it's interesting because they were made by filmmakers really in different countries with different experiences and ways of life, yet they clearly weave in a message that I felt could be seen throughout all these films. In this segment, I'd like to talk about why short films are important for the audience and really society as a whole. Okay, a short film. We've all seen them. We know what they are. They're condensed stories with a running time of 40 minutes or less, hence a short film. They're too short to be a feature film, so they call them a short film. Not that hard. They pick up from a point in the middle of a character's life without elaborating on much backstory. It exposes a moment in the character's life that we get to be privy to, and it ends unresolved because, obviously, that character's life is going to go on. We are just not going to see it. That's the punch that short films carry. They lead you to your own conclusion as an audience, right? It's really a powerful method of storytelling to get to the point immediately, or establish the problem immediately, and work around that rather than a traditional feature film 3-act story structure. Which means really quickly, in the first act, the main characters are established, as well as their relationship to each other. It ends with the problem, or the inciting incident, to sound smart, and that problem smacks the protagonist in the face and changes their lives forever. In the second act, there is something called rising action. How the protagonist attempts to solve the problem that bruised his face previously, and his ego, and how is he going to deal with the universal forces that are working against him in the form of an antagonist. It ends with them getting new super cool skills to demonstrate character development, and they acquire the help of friends to achieve their goal. I'm sure you can think of about 5 dozen films already that follow that lead so far. And finally, in the third act, we get a climax. An intense finish to the point of the story while tying up loose ends, and that dramatic yes-no question, will they, won't they question is answered, and the protagonist's, let's just be real here, their ego is completely restored. Awesome. Again, that's the traditional roadmap that movies used to follow, but they can't stray from that. I'm sure you can think of some. Here's the thing about short films. They leave you wanting more. They don't have to answer every question, or really any question for that matter. That's because they're a fragment of the character's life. But it's presented to you as the audience in such a way that you feel you know everything about them. You know where they live, what they live in, what they do for work, the relationship they have with their mother, is their father present, what their kids like to eat for breakfast. You feel like you're one of them. And then, a mere half hour later, when you're in love with this character and want them to succeed, it ends. Hopefully, if, the film's purpose has been clear, you're yearning to know more. What are they going to do tomorrow? Where are they going? How will they process everything that just happened to them that I witnessed? A short film, in my opinion, requires more skill to write and direct than a feature film because you're working with so much less, but still trying to achieve the same goal. Please, no one tell Spielberg I just said that in case he ever wants to hire me. Don't tell him. I think he does great work. Anyway, short films, to be honest, are often low budget, but high maintenance. You want that small look into the character's life that's making up the whole movie to be dignified. Because, I'll tell you, there's nothing worse than a project that turns out to be lackluster or silly with convoluted messaging when that wasn't the filmmaker's intention. Filmmakers who do this work pound the pavement and knock on every door possible, whether we're invited to or not, to get any kind of funding. Funds that we all need, they come in the form of grants, nonprofit organizations, crowdsourcing, or, most likely your personal stash of cash. So there's a lot riding on that short film because you're trying to build the greatest, most creative story on top of a pile of basically no money. The trajectory for a good short film is to be seen at international film festivals, where the exposure could make or break your career. If the movie wins awards at these festivals and gets good press and creates enough momentum, the filmmaker can be awarded with an Oscar nomination or, the holy grail, a distribution deal on a streaming platform, which was the case for several of these nominated films that I'm going to talk about. Seriously, I honestly don't know what's better now in this filmmaking climate for your film to be Oscar nominated or streamed on Netflix, Amazon, or Hulu. I mean, which gives you the most exposure for more opportunities? I have no idea. I'd take either one, honestly. So see, being in the filmmaking business, this is the business part of it, is learning to change and not expecting to make a film and set it on a traditional pathway to be seen. It's not like it even was 10 years ago, so have a firm business plan that takes every option into account. Okay, moving on. I swear this podcast won't be just me giving out warnings and airing out my grievances with the film industry. Anyway, short films are a simple form of entertainment. That's why we do them. They are of the same caliber as like a big feature in that it's tightly edited, the score is good, and the cinematography is top-notch. It's the classic tale of giving the little guy a voice and a chance. They just managed to get their point across a lot faster. And, finally, it's a solid way to platform all your talents and hopefully secure funding for a bigger project from bigger investors who rely on the feedback from these festivals to kind of indicate what's the hottest thing, what's a really cool new film that's coming out, and who made it, and what more can they do. These type of bigger investors, They include production companies or a film studio who have very fancy facilities to make movie magic and can add as many zeros to the budget as they'd like. So take these festival opportunities very seriously. Please stay tuned for the second segment where I introduce the first Oscar-nominated short film, The Present.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. It keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
Welcome back. In the last segment, I gave you a broad background on short films. So, in this segment, I want to actually introduce the first short film nominated this year for an Academy Award in the Best Live Action Short Film category. The first film is The Present. Written by Farah Nabulsi and Hind Shufani, Palestinian actor Saleh Bakri stars as Yusuf, a man living in the West Bank city of Bethlehem, who with his daughter Yasmin tries to buy a refrigerator in the town of Betunia as an anniversary gift for his wife. I do like a practical gift giver, I will say. The trouble for Yusuf is in order to get to Betunia, he and his daughter must pass through a checkpoint established by Israeli security forces. These are barriers set up in certain areas that are deemed to not be the safest, to put it simply. The film shows Yusuf's progress to get the fridge and come home as constantly paused or impeded by the checkpoints. In his first go-round, the soldiers on standby demand Yusuf to remove his jacket and shoes and take off his watch and to give them his wallet as he waits in a holding cell while they examine everything he has. They question why he is traveling that day, which forces him to read off his grocery list like it's a crazy idea that he even has the need as a human to eat food and he must justify it to them. I understand what Nabulsi was trying to do here. She was framing Yusuf as a David of sorts and the soldiers as Goliath. Yusuf is a hard-working family man battling back pain, who's so in love with his wife and daughter that it made me smile, who tries to live his life decently and quietly. He memorializes his late father. He lets old ladies cut in front of him in the line so they don't have to wait. And here he is getting pushed around by 21-year-old soldiers who don't care. And he's unable to do anything about it as his daughter watches. It sucks. Who would want to endure that on a daily basis, like the entire population Nabulsi makes clear does do that on the daily basis? After a long period of time waiting for the soldiers to get around to Yusuf, he's let go and allowed to continue on his way to Betunia for groceries and the fridge. So much time passing is heartbreakingly shown when his daughter needs the bathroom but is unable to hold it. It serves as another reminder of how helpless Yusuf was because a force bigger than him blocked him from attending to his daughter, the one thing he has the indelible right to do, and that was taken away from him. When the delivery truck carrying the new appliance is unable to pass through a different checkpoint on the other side of the city for unexpected reasons, which, a side note, there's always a reason given in real life in these circumstances, but it's a movie. Yusef is forced to push the fridge on a dolly on foot and return to the checkpoint at which he began his journey, only to be reunited with the same punk soldiers from that morning. They demand to know why he even needed to buy a fridge in the first place. Proceed to inspect all his bags, specifically the one containing his daughter's soiled clothes from before, and then they yell at him. Again. Now, up until this point, Yusef has been remarkably composed and civil. However, the criticism of his daughter is what chips away at his edges further and further until he can't stand this any longer. He says, "I live right over there. I want to go home. I want to go home." He bangs on the table with his fists. The soldiers draw their guns. A picture-perfect climax. Goliath outnumbers David in manpower, and these men are ready to fight with their guns when all David has is a refrigerator. But David's heroic slingshot appears. It grabs the dolly carrying the fridge and moves it defiantly around the checkpoint structure. And that is his daughter. She's had enough of watching her father humiliated for the third time that day and carts the fridge around the checkpoint where it will fit, not through it like Yusef was ordered to do. She was tired. It took a whole day to travel 20 miles, and it's late. She's tired. She couldn't control how long it took to travel those 20 miles, or what her father had to endure. But how they got home, with their fridge of freedom, that she could control. The film ends with Yusef and Yasmin carting their fridge home, and the soldiers stand there taken aback at how a child seemingly solved a problem on her own, and how they would have to deal with the flack resulting from that. I didn't dislike this film. It's a very specific problem that only a specific group of people really know about. Two groups of people, actually. Israelis and Palestinian. My whole life has been characterized by this conflict. I'm intimately familiar with these checkpoints, and they weigh on my mind every day. I don't like them, and no one does. And I don't wish to get into it now. It's a tangent that's not helpful for this show. And besides, we're talking about a film. So I have to give it the proper exposure and do my due diligence to talk about it in a neutral way. But in terms of reviewing it and critiquing it as another filmmaker, for the purposes of the show, I will say I found it a little one-sided, and that it was overly simplifying a socio-political problem. We all know the reasons these checkpoints exist. They unfortunately uproot the lives of good people in order to catch those looking to do harm. But I also know that was the point. It's a short film. It showed one day in the life of Yusef. I don't know what tomorrow looks like for him, but I hope he doesn't dwell too much on what happened to him that day and enjoys his new fridge. I genuinely wish that. I also wish the film ended with him presenting the gift to his wife. At least that would have been a high note. The film was bigger than the fridge. I know that. Anyone watching it knows that. And Nabulsi did a great job in expressing her ideas and thoughts on the situation. The present swept the festival circuit. It premiered at the Clermont-Ferrand International Short Film Festival. Wow, that was terrible pronunciation. And won the Audience Award for Best Film. Located in Clermont-Ferrand, France. Is that a little better? Yes, no? I'll be quiet. This is the biggest international film festival dedicated to short films for the last 40 years. It's the second largest festival in France after the one and only Cannes. It receives over 7,000 submissions yearly and only accepts around 600. It is the place to get exposure that any filmmaker would need for them and their projects. The clout that this festival gave the present led it to win awards at other festivals like the Cleveland International Film Festival, the Brooklyn Film Festival, and the coveted Palm Springs International Festival of Short Films, which is the largest short film festival in the United States. The Palm Springs Festival is only 20 years old, yet 97 short films that have played there in its slim history have gone on to get Oscar nominations. This included The Present. It already won a BAFTA in England for Best Short Film, the British Academy of Film and Television Association, and it's a frontrunner in this year's Oscars. One more thing I would like to add about The Present. Well, two more things. The key to a successful film, and there are many, is a good, catchy title that is thought-provoking. Like a song, the film's name needs to be memorable and meaningful. Think of, and, although I don't like those dudes from Boston, unless they listen to this podcast, then hey guys, think of Good Will Hunting. Matt Damon, Ben Affleck film from the 90s. That's a home run of a title. It can mean so many things, depending on which word you emphasize, or if you take it as a metaphor. And still, all of those possibilities apply to the story and the message of that movie. The present, as a name, refers to the actual gift of the fridge, but also the present-day situation Yosef is trying to get through. Double meaning is always good. Remember that, if nothing else. Lastly, the last thing about this film is a creative decision that I really liked seeing was the opening scene of the film. Yosef is at the checkpoint at an ungodly time of morning, maybe 5 a.m., before the sun rises and everyone is trying to get to work. People are packed in there, shuffling along very slowly. You can barely lift your arms, you're shoulder to shoulder with the people next to you. They're trying to get past this stage of their morning commute, like it's Grand Central Station at 8 a.m. on a Monday. People are even scaling the walls. It's that crowded. According to Nabulsi, this scene was produced with guerrilla filmmaking. If that sounds aggressive, it's because it is. This tactic is used to film a scene really quickly in a location that you don't have permission to shoot in. They didn't have a warning or a filming permit of any kind. You need to, quote-unquote, steal the scene, as it's called. So, all those people crowded at the checkpoint were not extras, they were not day players, but actually, they were residents of the area just trying to get through and start their day. They were there in real time because they had to be. It's their life. It looked like there were hundreds of people. And maybe they probably edited out, but there really wasn't anybody looking straight at the camera, making eye contact with it. They're just saying that I have more important things to do in my life, and I just want to get through this horrible start to my morning. This tactic that Nabulsi used shows that in filmmaking, especially independent and low budget, bare bones, skeleton kind of crew, shows that these risks need to be taken sometimes when permission isn't available traditionally. Nabulsi did what she needed to do to make a powerful scene to extend her narrative. So for that, I say bravo. Stay tuned for the third segment where I discuss the next film nominated, Two Distant Strangers.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back. In the last segment, I discussed the significance of the present, and in this segment, I'd like to introduce the next film, Two Distant Strangers. Two Distant Strangers is a science fiction drama set in New York City, written by Trayvon Fee and directed by Fee and Martin Desmond Ray. It follows the main character, Carter, a black man, trying to leave the apartment of the woman he spent the night with and go home to his dog. The film opens with the dog crying and whimpering and sniffing his empty food and water bowl and crying, and then I immediately start crying. When there's a dog crying, I cry too. I am following the tears of that dog with my own. To quote Dolly Parton in Steel Magnolias, I have a strict policy that nobody cries alone in my presence, and that applies to me when there is an animal crying. Each time that Carter steps out of the building, he comes face to face with a white police officer named Officer Merck. An altercation escalates between the two, with Carter minding his own business, but acting in such a way that looks suspicious to the officer, but that is obviously subjective. It's a matter of opinion. It's not the case in this film. This altercation leads to Carter's death continuously, after which he wakes up in the bed of his date from the night before to attempt to leave all over again. In a broader canvas, the film obviously examines the deaths of Black Americans during encounters with police officers in this really nightmare of a time loop that doesn't produce a different outcome. Carter attempts to leave 99 times, And by the 100th time, he decides to approach Officer Merck rather than wait for him to find him to discuss the situation they are finding themselves in. He goes up to him and he says, I know what you're about to say to me. You're going to say these don't smell like cigarettes. And he's like, I'll prove it. Look at the girl across the street. She's about to take a selfie. She takes a selfie. He says, look down the street. There's a couple about to kiss. And they kiss. He says, look on the other side of the street. There's a kid about to fall off of his skateboard. And the kid falls off of his skateboard. And then, to top it all off, Carter says to Officer Merck, in 2 seconds, your phone is about to ring. 2 seconds later, his phone rings. Carter goes, it's your mother calling. She always calls when you don't call back in 5 minutes. And obviously, Officer Merck is equally confused at how Carter knows all this. After he explains it to him, Merck decides to drive Carter home. Maybe having that direct hand in the outcome of today will allow everything to go smoothly and prevent any problem. The car ride goes without mishap. The two kind of discuss their backgrounds, and Carter is pretty comfortable asking him, what made you be a police officer? To which Merck says, I was tired of being bullied. And Carter asks, so you became one yourself? Merck replies with equal snark, now I put bullies away. So they're having a very kind of free-flow, casual conversation. There's no tension, and for a moment they are addressing each other as just two guys on the street. It doesn't matter that one's in uniform. It doesn't matter that they're in a police car. It doesn't matter that Carter is sitting in the back of the police car. They're just two guys talking and having a conversation. So when they arrive at Carter's apartment building, they shake hands, and they each agree that it was nice meeting the other person, but they hope to God that they don't see each other again. Carter turns around to walk towards his apartment building, when all of a sudden, Officer Merck, in twisted ramblings, similar to some psychotic episode, cheers Carter on for putting on the best performance of them all, saying this was real cool and noble of you. This reveals that Officer Merck, the whole time, has remembered the last 100 encounters the two of them had that day. He shoots Carter for dead, saying, see you tomorrow, kid. And Carter once more wakes up in his date's bed to fight this battle another day. The film ends with Carter exiting the woman's apartment, and on the staircase he says to himself, it doesn't matter how long it takes or how many times I have to do this. I will get home to my dog. And the film ends. The end credits of the film list the names of Black Americans who have died in encounters with police in recent years that we of a country have seen before. This politically charged film is definitely timely. As I record this episode today in New York, a jury all the way in Minneapolis just reached a verdict in a very public, very exhausting, 3-week-long trial of an officer found guilty of killing a civilian last May when he was charged on 3 counts of murder. The socio-political significance of two distant strangers definitely makes it a front runner for the Oscars this year. This film has won an African American Critics Association Award for Best Short Film and was picked up and distributed by Netflix earlier this month. This film is short. It's just under 30 minutes, but it is so powerful and so upsetting. It pulls out all the stops. It doesn't skirt around the issue or try and handle it delicately so that the audience might be able to digest it better, or worse, be able to walk away and forget what they just saw. No. What Two Distant Strangers does is they take the issue and they throw it in your face so you can see and deal with it, as a short film should, as any film really should. This film has some noticeable differences to the present in terms of production. It had a noticeably higher budget, and it used special effects to create the time warp of Carter reliving a day in hell over and over again. That there was some CGI when it zoomed in on his eyes looking in a mirror, and there was CGI when he would be bleeding out but staring up at himself from above, things like that. The budget differences could be because of where the movie was filmed. In the sense that here in New York, or any other U.S. city with a big filming industry and American money funding it, high quality equipment could be easier to obtain than from the sources the crew on the present had access to, given that it was so few people involved in it. Also, I feel there was a bigger budget on Two Distant Strangers because of the writer and the director. Trayvon Fee is an Emmy Award-winning comedian, actor, and writer. He has written for several shows and several networks, including Full Frontal with Samantha Bee and The Daily Show on Comedy Central, and Any Given Wednesday with Bill Simmons on HBO. Martin Desmond Rowe is a filmmaker who founded an LA-based film production company of which he serves as creative director called Dirty Robber. This is not his first Oscar-nominated short film either. His film Bukashi Boys was nominated in 2012 for the same award the current film he co-wrote is up for now. Farah Nabulsi, on the other hand, has a background in business. That's where she got her degree in, not film production. She worked as a chartered financial analyst for JP Morgan. I don't even know what that means, but it sounds so impressive. And she didn't venture into film until 2016 when she founded her first production company. If anyone can make $1 go a long way, though, it would be her. The differences between these two crews is stark, but they aren't be-all, end-all. A woman with no proper training in film, as in, she didn't go to film school, or pay hundreds of dollars to take writing workshops just to be told, you stink, or even worse, she didn't do improv comedy like some of us. And look where she landed. In the same place as those industry professionals. It just proves that if your idea is golden, meaning it means something good to you, and you have a clear-cut vision on how to get it made and how to execute your plan, it doesn't matter where you came from. What matters is how you got here. Stay tuned for the fourth segment where I share my thoughts on the Oscars choices for this year's Best Live Action Short Film nominees based on the two films I spoke about today.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blanks and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Welcome back. Here we finally are, at the fourth segment. First, thank you for listening all the way through. I really appreciate it. And I hope you've learned something or are inspired to watch these films that are truly world-class examples of filmmaking. In the last segment, I introduced Two Distant Strangers, and in this segment, I'd like to tie in the two films I spoke about and why I started off my Oscars short film episode, part 1, with these two films in particular. If you take a second to compare The Present and Two Distant Strangers, on the surface, they don't seem congruent. Carter and Yusuf live on opposite sides of the world. They're literally 5,000 miles apart. They don't speak the same language. They don't dress the same. They don't observe the same holidays. They don't listen to the same music. Yusuf is an older man with a wife and a daughter who doesn't have a lot of material things. Carter is a young, successful graphic designer with a fancy Manhattan apartment. I mean, he had a mural of him and his dog dressed like royalty that was painted and hung on his wall. What does Yusuf have? He doesn't even own a working fridge. The point is, they are not even close to knowing who the other person is. They're not thinking about each other in the slightest. However, there is a unifying factor that exists between Carter and Yusuf. And that is that each of our respective protagonists from the two different films are dealing with the same antagonist, really, who can be identified as someone who automatically distrusts them just because of who they are. They didn't do anything wrong. One's just going about errands, buying fruit and meat. One is leaving a date that he had a good time on, and he's walking home. But they need to cross paths with someone they're pretty sure doesn't like them, and know that there's no way around that. They need to stay calm and collected, because the moment an outburst happens can mean serious consequences for both these people. On one side of them is a rock, and the other side is a hard place. And that place that I mentioned is filled to the brim with voices diminished by circumstances out of their control. These two films are a good versus a subjective evil theme, and I'm sure this was not lost on the Academy as they selected their 5 final nominees. Given that they are, so far, based on this episode, the Academy is leaning towards films that kind of advocate for the disadvantaged and the people facing inequality. Makes me wonder what type of award show in and of itself it's going to be. What kind of speeches, what kind of hosts, what kind of skits and gimmicks that they come up with. If they're going to, I can only imagine they're going to incorporate current events that we've seen in the last year. They wouldn't be a Hollywood production without incorporating current events and expressing your opinion that maybe people aren't asking for. However, their show, they have a right to express it, just like any of us. So I'm sure that they put a lot of thought into the films that they selected as the last film standing to be the nominees. And after I express what films are in the running as well in part 2's episode, let me know what you think will be the most likely winner. If there is a clear winner, which one do you think it will be? Personally, I have a couple ideas as to which one might come out on top at the end of all this, but I won't share it until after part 2's episode, where I explain what each movie is about. With that, I want to thank you for listening to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. If you like this episode, please subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That would really help us. Also, if you can, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Finally, stay tuned for the next episode when I discuss the last 3 live-action short films nominated at this year's Academy Awards. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.